and we can make that available for folks who want to see it. So we'll just jump in and welcome you all to the Queer and Trans Leadership Series. We're very excited to collaborate with the Undergraduate Environmental Union, and I'd invite you to say a few words about your work in the series that you all are, that this is a part of for you all, as well as the Nicholas Queer Network. So thank you all so much for your work and collaboration in making this possible. Maya, Kate, did y'all want to say a little bit about your groups? And
yeah, sure. Thank you all for being here today. It's really great to see everyone come together for this topic. My name is Maya Ghanem. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Justice Coordinator of the Undergraduate Environmental Union. We're basically like the central body for undergraduate environmental programming. I specifically work on environmental justice issues, and this is part of a diversity, equity, inclusion series that we're having. We're trying to highlight different identity markers in the relationship with the environment. So thank you, everyone.
Sure, and I'm Kate. My pronouns are she, hers. I'm in the Nicholas School, and I'm part of the Nicholas Queer Network. So we're really excited to partner with you all to host this. I think this year especially, I think the community, it's felt hard to connect with people and felt small. And so part of our group's goal is to kind of create a bigger kind of social network for queer students at the Nicholas School. And so we're really excited to kind of connect students with resources both within the Nicholas School, but also in wider Duke and in wider Durham. So yeah, thank you all to the speakers for being here.
thank you both so much. And I just want to say this is part of also for the Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity. We're putting this under the umbrella of our Queer and Trans Leadership Series, which is intentional in trying to highlight the leadership qualities and ways in which identity informs strong leaders working at different intersections within different sectors and fields. And so we're really excited. Brian, do you want to say a bit about student leadership, one of the collaborators on this as well?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Brian Lackman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm assistant director with the student leadership area, which is part of UCAE and student engagement as a whole. And so our office does a lot of work with deconstructing and reconstructing leadership to ensure that leadership is able to be experienced and be found and kind of cultivated and harnessed by people across multiple intersections. And so it's been a great partnership over the past few years now to work on this series with CSUD and a variety of different partners. And we're thrilled for today's speaker as well, or speakers, I should say, in our panel conversation today as a whole. So we're thrilled to be part of this conversation and dialogue. It's such an important intersectional conversation that I think is only going to be more critical every day, week, and month that goes by. So thank you all so much for being here, and thank you so much for our panelists for making yourselves available and being present for this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. And I just want to shout out to the Lugwoods for their support of the Queer and Trans Leadership Series. And I want to, as all of our co-conspirators have done, express my sincerest gratitude to Desi, to Elijah, and Narissa for your willingness to come and share more with us about who you are, about the important work that you're doing, and inspire us all in knowing how we can make a difference at the intersection of our identities and this important environmental justice work that you all are doing. And so without further ado, I would love it if each of you would take just a couple of minutes and tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how your identity within the LGBTQI plus community intersects with your work in environmentalism. And while you're doing that, if you could also talk a little bit about how mentorship has played a role in your activism and your career within environmental justice work. And I won't call anyone out, so whoever feels moved and led to start first.
Cool.
You go ahead.
Oh,
Desi.
you go ahead. Jinx. Okay. All right, cool. Would you mind putting the prompts in the chat as they go? It'll just like help me. And I'm sure it'll help y'all too, just focus in on the questions. Okay, cool. My name is Desiree Fontenot. I use she, her, they, them pronouns. I am calling in from Huchen, Leaf John Aloni land here, also known as Oakland, California. Let's see, I'm doing pretty well today. It's very, very sunny because it's California. So in good spirits, feeling really happy. And I am a collective member and co-director of Movement Generation Justice and Ecology Project. And Movement Generation has been like a political home for me before I worked there, but especially in the last 3 years as being part of it. And I'll get into a little bit more of what we do, but basically MG's been around doing climate justice intersectional movement work for the last 13 years. And a core of our work is bringing organizers from different sectors together for justice and ecology retreats and trainings, hands-on ecological skills workshops, cultural productions, and then a lot of pollination work, which is kind of just like creating different coalitions and connections and alliance building in different ways. So it's just a slice. I'm also a farmer. I'm also a cat mom. I'm also a sweetheart, you know, so all of the roles that I play in the world are really important too. And yeah, have a lot to share. And let's see, how does my queer identity intersect with the work I do? It's kind of like pretty central. So one of the research areas I did when I was in my grad program, I did a program at Pacific School of Religion and Social Transformation, which is an umbrella, very big umbrella MA, which I basically called a Choose Your Own Adventure program. And they focused on ecology and queerness and African diasporic identity. But in that, I had this like queer ecology class that I co-made up with someone at UC Berkeley. And from there, my 10 years of working in LGBT organizing, from a student organizer at University of Southern California, where I did my undergrad, to my farmy queer work, all came together in this aha piece. But ultimately, I want to say that, like everything, they're inextricably linked. And I'll stop there because I realize I'm going long. Like, you could say a lot, I could say a little. Why don't I leave it there? And then was that the gist of it? Access needs. My needs are met right now. I got my water. I hope everyone's hydrated. And I'll pass it on to one of my fellow panelists.
Sure. So I'll go ahead and go for it next. Y'all can hear me, correct? All right, cool. So yeah, so I'm Narissa. I do go by they, them, theirs pronouns. So I'm actually currently a second year dual degree MPP MEM at the Sanford School of Public Policy and also the Nicholas School of Environment. I'm specializing in energy. And I'm also a graduate assistant at the California Public Utility Commission and a research assistant at the Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions. And I'm also part of a Bath Connection student research team. So to say the least, I'm pretty slammed this semester. In terms of, I guess, my intersectional identities, being a trans non-binary person of color and in the energy industry, I see these identities intersecting with my industry, as both queer and BIPOC people are less equipped, unfortunately, to being able to adapt to a changing climate, or poor on average, or grappling with things like, energy insecurity. So this is why I think it's really important for, people that are like us, look like us, to be informing these decisions regarding climate or energy policy. And then in terms of the role of like queer mentorship, I actually wish this would have played more of a direct role in my career. And I'm hoping, more people like us continue to break into the industry and redistribute knowledge and resources.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, co-panelists, for sharing. I want to just note by saying I'm super excited to be here with you both. Desi, I was actually just listening to one of your presentations a few days ago. So I'm like, oh yes, I'm excited. And it's such a pleasure to see you and meet you and hear from you. And just to introduce myself, so I'm Elijah Brunson. I was a former, not former, I graduated from Duke University in my undergrad, and I identify as queer, and the pronouns I currently use are he, him, his. I'm open to receiving them all. So if you want to reference me in any way that you see that I'm fitting that particular day, I'm open to receiving that energy at any point. Let's see who I am in terms of my work. I love that I'm a sweetheart. I want to ditto that. I'm a sweetheart. I'm kind. I'm graceful. I am a Kundalini yogi. That's one of my many hats that I wear. And I'm a practitioner of theater of the oppressed. So I like doing embodied work as a means of exploring who I am as a person, but also collectively with others, exploring who we are and how we relate to one another. I am an environmental advocate, specifically in the realm of environmental justice and climate justice. And in terms of just overlay of my identity and how that intersects with environmentalism, and specifically in the concept of queerness. And I think being someone who was born in a rural area that's of low income, that is a very religious space in terms of Christianity, being queer automatically gave me this lens on life that said, okay, whatever the norm is may not actually be correct or accurate, because people are telling me these things that I'm not good, or I'm going to X, Y, and Z places. And then I tell myself, well, I'm a good person. I'm kind. I'm doing all these wonderful things. And that adds this beautiful lens to how I look at life, right? And so I think the way that I engage with the world and looking at the planet, I'm like, so it doesn't have to be this extractive model, or this, we as human exist in this very, if we're thinking about gender in a binary, right? If we as humans exist in this maleness and the earth itself exists in this femaleness, then we practice this extractive relationship with the earth. And in my queerness, I say to myself, actually, we don't have to do that. Like, actually, that's not the relationship I want to have here. I'm actually called to be of service. So like my queerness is this beautiful lens that allows me to say, what I see in the world is not what I want to be, right? Because that's not what I am. And so I can choose to be something else. And just in terms of career and mentorship, I've had some wonderful mentors. I'm not going to name them because I'm not sure if they're open to me naming them as queer mentors in this space. I just want to say that there's this particular event that I went to back in 2014, and I'm taking a lot of airtime. So I'm noting this to let my two co-panelists know, like, please take more airtime because I ramble. I went to the North Carolina Climate Justice Summit my first time in 2014. And when I tell you I started drinking the Kool-Aid on that date, when it came to climate justice and environmental justice, and how queerness rolls beautifully into that realm and into that work, and how in that space there are a lot of queer leaders that have not necessarily explicitly said, I'm going to be your mentor, but have said, come join us. We respect your vision. We respect what you bring to this space. And there's so much mentorship in leaders that just say, hey, even though you're young, like, we notice you and we value your opinion. And I think there's so much of that in the climate justice work. There's all these wonderful queer people who are just like, show up in the best way that you can, be your whole self, so that you don't have to like pretend in this space. So I'll stop there and toss it back up for the next question.
Desi, did you want to pop back to mentors you want to lift up in this work?
Sure, just a quick plug. I feel like I had a lot of folks early on who had been doing work that was very clearly siloed in LGBTQ organizing at first. And as I started to, and I think as our movement started to unravel a little bit in terms of like knowing that like we have to come out of these silos that we've built within these sectors, meeting more and more folks who embodied so many intersections and were playing roles across spaces and doing that bridging work, that really opened things up for me in a different way. I won't name too many names, but just there's a lot of amazing BIPOC women and femme and trans folks who are in my heart, and a lot of ecological nerds who are just like queer in their own right in all the ways. So yeah, thank you for looping back.
Beautiful. For the next question, we wanted to ask you all if you feel that LGBTQI plus voices are adequately centered in the environmental justice movement, and if not, what can we do to further incorporate those voices?
Do you want to go first? I'm talking, so I guess I'll go. I feel like there is always work to do in our movement. It's been interesting just in the last like 5 years, seeing a lot of shifts in how folks come together and how folks are like really like moving conversations from like the sort of flattening of our identities and the like diversity inclusion in the workplace stuff to actually like what do we have to do to shift the culture of our work to better like serve the communities that we're accountable to as movement actors and to create the ways of being that we're fighting for, right? We can't just like show up to the table, be burned out, not be our full selves, and like expect to like build transformative action together. So I think a lot of what I'm seeing and hearing on the grapevine in like very squarely environmental or EJ organizations is a lot of internal shifts and like how do we change the way that we govern? We're actually like queering that. The more that we bring ourselves to a space, the more that we can actually like say this is a different way to work. One thing I want to say about Movement Generation, we're a flat organization, the first flat organization I've worked for in my like 12 years in the nonprofit sector. And it's just such an amazingly different mind shift and culture shift in how I come and how I bring the roles that I do, both in terms of like the strategic, visionary, programmatic things and the like operational nitty-gritty logistics, and knowing that like we need like both, and we need to be like tuned to both. And just the way that we care for each other. Like, I think that is like a very queer act in itself. And I'm seeing that more and more, the like deeper folks get into like having folks show up as their full selves in the work that they're doing. And then I think the flip side of that with the LGBTQ work becoming more and more like, we are folks who are on the front lines being impacted by the impacts of climate change first and worst. That has been really interesting to see of like, we, staying in the realm of just incorporating racial and economic justice into mainstream LGBT stuff has been like hella hard, but actually putting like a clear ecological like commitment. I feel like that is even not more exciting to me, but like there's something about seeing that opening up and de-siloing there. Like I don't know if y'all know about the Creating Change conference. I think that might be the last place I saw you, Angel. But 5 years ago, there was one workshop out of 4,000 on LGBTQ movement stuff that was about environmentalism, climate justice, just one in the whole thing. And it was full of queer folks who worked in EJ and big environmental organizations. And they're like, why is this the only space at this whole, national gathering for us to talk about these intersections? And since then, me and some other folks did some of that, like expanded that workshop years after that. And seeing just like folks being like, actually, this is the work of creating queer liberation, is actually like centering our relationship to place. So just in terms of like, what are we shaping for like our real queer agenda in the next 30 plus years versus what we've had this last 30 years? I think it's a really great time to be entering movement spaces because everything is kind of being burst open in that way. So I'll stop at that. But got me all excited. Let's keep talking.
I can chime in here, and I'll be short this time for balance. And my simple answer to the first question, if we're adequately centered, is no. I agree with Desi. There's definitely a lot of work to be done, and as you add margins onto like being LGBTQIA plus, like right, as you add brownness of different types, like as you add toneness, right? Colorism is a real thing. As you add those layers into the environmental movement, I think we start realizing that, wow, not only do we need to center more queer voices, but then within that, there has to be this additional centering of like, especially femme, right? Femme and Black women of color, like in those spaces. Like, are we listening, and are we listening well? Are we equipped to listen? Because sometimes we're not equipped to listen to queer folks, I think, in spaces, right? Because sometimes we might be readily writing people off or saying, oh, they're just here because they fit this category, they check these boxes. And just making sure that we like come with these ears that are actually ready to receive what people are saying when they are centered. What can we do to further incorporate voices? I am thinking, at least for myself and in my experiences in environmental justice work, greatest examples is when like you're sitting around in a group session and everyone's introducing themselves, and then you're in this moment, you're just like, okay, especially for me, I can say I can occasionally be straight passing. As long as I don't speak or move too much, I might be straight passing, right? And then I'm thinking to myself, okay, am I going to share my identity in this space? And what will that do to this space that I'm in? And so I think a part of incorporation is just feeling very much so empowered and supported, even if people in the room aren't necessarily supporting you, but there's like people like here in this panel that are just like hoping and rooting for you to say, yes, I'm queer, I'm here, I'm in this meeting, we're having this conversation. No, I'm not trying to have my queerness derail us. I'm actually trying to have my queerness direct us into a place where we need to be, right? Let this be the foundation where we have this conversation. And if I and my wholeness cannot be invited to this conversation, then what are we doing when we're talking about environmental justice when I can't show up and feel like I can be well in this space with you all? So from my perspective, I think showing up is one layer. And then another layer is demand is not the word I want to look for, but set the expectation when you show up to spaces that people are going to respect and honor you, and just like embody that. Like, because you're deserving of that respect and honor when you show up in these spaces during this environmental justice, environmental advocacy work. And if they aren't willing to listen, that's all right. You should still speak, right? Still raise your hand. I had one of my mentors told me that oftentimes it is women and people of color that are often feel like they can't speak in meetings, right? Or will second guess themselves in meetings. You can second guess and still raise your hand and speak. Like, please do. Please do. It is important to stand up and show up in those spaces, to say that you're here, to say that you're queer, to say that you are doing this work. And even if they don't want to acknowledge and recognize your work, not saying that spaces don't, but even if they don't, like, you acknowledge it, because there'll be people in those spaces that may come up to you later and say, thank you so much for sharing yourself here. And it'll be your elders that'll come up to you that haven't felt safe in their entire lifetimes to share that part of themselves. And just in that moment, you're creating this beautiful, robust community that says, we're not actually going to live in these binaries anymore. We're going to practice different relationships with one another, because I think it's the relationships. Wow, my airtime is long. Just making that note. Oh, got carried away. But in these new relationships that we're forming, we're actually creating the foundation for the worlds that we want to see. So we want to make sure that we're working on those relationships that we have with one another. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Wow, I mean, y'all basically said almost everything I kind of want to say, but yeah, so I guess, add maybe some additional thoughts. I do feel that there's quite a bit of a silo kind of between the energy environmental industries, not in terms of impact, because I think the energy industry has obviously perpetuated a lot of harm towards, the environment. But I guess to kind of, answer the question. So I actually personally don't see that many queer voices being adequately centered in the energy industry. And oftentimes, like, the only other queer faces I tend to see regularly are white gay men. And even that's really rare. And then in terms of what we can do to further like incorporate both queer and BIPOC voices, and I'm going to kind of echo some things that Desi was saying, but I think it requires like a really critical reevaluation with the very tools with which we try to recruit for diversity. And actually, like, there's a connection of mine on LinkedIn that shared this really awesome article from Harper's Bazaar, and the article title is called, let's see if I remember it, the diversity and inclusion industry has lost its way. And I do have some wonderful kind of nuggets I'd like to share from that. So basically, I guess the DEI industry is kind of dominated by what scholars often call like personnel managers or employees in human resources. And I guess from like the 60s to the 80s, these administrators were definitely really true to their vocation, like concerning themselves basically with avoiding lawsuits and just increasing productivity. And I think like the DEI industry is just really, really close to getting caught in the assembly line of its own making. And I think it's important for us to understand that movements are about reallocating power, while I think sometimes DEI on the corporate realm is preoccupied with just simply reorganizing people. And so this, I think, should have us question, are we just checking boxes, or are we integrating, marginalized populations into a hostile work environment where they're being forced like code switch to assimilate, or where they're not being supported enough, or where upper management will just simply echo, I hear your concerns, instead of I hear your concerns, here's an action plan we will implement so we can be held accountable.
Thank
I
you.
just wanted so I just wanted to toss a just added layer to the end. I just wanted to add, like, and are we just trying to do this for clearance for funding, which happens a lot in nonprofits? So I'm just gonna slide that in there.
Yes, the nonprofit industrial complex is a total thing.
Thank you so much for your responses. Like, that was amazing. I always thought that like HR can sometimes be a little bit suspicious, but now hearing it vocalized is very important. So the next question is a very broad topic, but if you have like 1 or 2 points that you'd want the audience to take away from this idea, please share. So the question is, could you talk about the intersection between race, the LGBTQ plus community, and environmental justice? I know it's very big, but if there's 1 or 2 things that you think are most important regarding that intersection.
Yeah, sure. And I think one example where, I would imagine the other panelists and I would probably see a very clear intersection. I think a lot of people tend to think of, like, I guess some of the bigger EJ work being done by like some like the big green organizations. But for me, like that example doesn't really actually cross my mind. I think where I actually see a really clear intersection of race and environmental justice is definitely within the Black Lives Matter movement. Although it is really important to obviously preface that, BLM isn't a monolithic entity. And so I guess if we think about it, like the private sector's grip on certain communities, whether that's through pipelines that poison communities, to CAFOs, and just in case folks don't know what CAFOs stands for, concentrated animal feeding operations, such an alphabet soup, but or things like toxic coal ash dumping. And I think these types of things produce a less televised, slower form of violence, which is absolutely connected and upheld by state sanctioned violence, which who are the actors for state sanctioned violence? And that would be the police. And so I think the slow violence is protected by the threat of a more imminent direct violence, and pre-existing health conditions such as asthma that are often due to environmental hazards being disproportionately placed in communities of color. This actually then makes the direct violence when exerted by police more lethal. So essentially, I think the BLM movement can kind of be seen as like an embodied experience of structural and environmental insecurity. And this insecurity is through the everyday simple act of breathing and conditions which breath can be constricted or denied. Thus, kind of like the phrase, one way to interpret I can't breathe. And queerness fits into this, as queer and BIPOC people are even further in the crosshairs of poverty and therefore the prison pipeline, both of which exacerbate like the structural insecurity that these populations are being subjugated to.
Yeah, thank you, Nursa. You get a whole degree unpacking that question. I'm sure some of you maybe are getting a whole degree right now unpacking that question, right? There's like examples across decades, if not centuries, of the ways that our bodies and lands are stolen from us, extracted upon, poisoned. And, it's heavy. Like, I just want to like sit with what you shared, because there's like sometimes like we could like, the numbers, the reality, it's like it's so real, but just like somatically, like sit with that for a moment. Like, yeah, I have to remind myself too, because it's like, you get into like your research head on, and it's like, okay, but just feeling it, I feel like something that has really helped me in a lot of what I put forth in a lot of different spaces is just around like cultural diversity, thinking of it, taking it outside of the way it's been flattened to check off a box, but like the actual cultural diversity of the world and biological diversity. They're two things that are inextricably linked. Like you could look at a map where there's immense biodiversity, there's also immense linguistic and cultural diversity. And the worldview and culture and economy we have now is bent on eradicating that diversity. So if you think about the eradication of diversity, and you have the intersection of ethnic diversity, gender and sexual diversity, and the diversity of the living world, you could see how the root cause is all the same, right? This global industrial extractive economy that is just a hot mess that, you know, we are just many people to have inherited over time. So if we are interested in preserving the diversity of the world, we can't keep putting forth the monocultures of not just the land, but of the minds that are colonizing us, right? We have to actually interrupt things at all of those levels, because it's that shared root cause, the shared logics of white supremacy and cis heteronormativity and all of the isms that we're all spending lots of time getting degrees in that just hits. Right. So yeah, just stop eradicating diversity, like the true diversity of the world that we have, because it's the key to our resilience. Like diversity assures resilience, and without it, we can't actually like have, be a part of the living systems that we're just one piece of. So that's all I'll add, because I'm like, yeah, there's degrees upon degrees. We could keep adding to that.
Thank y'all. I want to start with ditto, and I think the thing that I would add is the experience of just being in multiple margins, right? Coming from a community where you didn't realize that there were environmental injustices happening around you, right? That was just built into your everyday. So you didn't know that. You didn't realize like the impacts on your mom's body from working at a chicken rending plant, and what that means she was exposed to by being inside of that place, and then what it means for you to be exposed when they come home. And then if you think about queerness in rural spaces where maybe you're more likely to be kicked out of your home, and then you're also in a rural space, maybe it's also in a floodplain, and then we got climate disruptions coming back and back and back and forth constantly, and then all of a sudden it's flooding and you may not even have a home right now. And then how do you even engage and access resources? What are those fears that exist in your body when you're trying to access resources, and you may not feel like you even have a foundation from which to stand to connect with people to get resources, or you may feel like you're in an unsafe place. And then if you layer on what it means to be in multiple margins, like as a Black person specifically for me, and then showing up in spaces that are all Black, but not necessarily queer accepting, queer open, queer loving, queer affirming, and you're just like, wow, I'm trying to do this work. And part of the work is, I don't want to say fighting against, but in many ways it's fighting against the people who I thought are my allies. So I think a big takeaway from this is in our process of trying to be diverse and not trying to be diverse, we're already diverse, but in interconnecting our diversity so we're connected through it. There's this process of internal reforming the ways that we have built relationships with one another, and this process of letting go of things that no longer serve us individually and as a community as we try to build together. So yeah, I'll just stop there.
So I think we're it's time for the next question. I think thank you for all your beautiful responses. I think all of you have talked a little bit about the importance of connections and the importance of mentorships and partnerships. And so my next question is, how can we build a strong LGBTQIA plus network in the environmental field? And what kinds of LGBTQ plus collaborations have you participated in? And could you speak a little bit to what seems to work best in those collaborations?
I can chime in first this time. And let's see, building strong networks. I think one thing that is critical for building strong networks is making sure that, as I should say, it was showing up earlier, sharing your identity is a big piece of that, because like a way to connect with people is just being able to know like how people step into space. You might, and then from there, being open and okay with actually stepping up and talking to people specifically because they are queer and in this work with you, and being able to open that conversation like, hey, I see that you're a queer person in this space, as am I, and I would love to have a conversation about what it means for us to work together and show up collectively in these spaces. So I think that's one thing that I haven't actively been doing, but that I want to be moving into in this next season, is to be connecting with other people that are queer doing this work. And then queer collaboration. So I'm a part of the North Carolina Climate Justice Collective, and there is quite a bit of queerness in that leadership team. And what I like to uplift and celebrate about what works best is the fact that oftentimes in queer spaces that are collaborative, there's this big centering of cultural work in that space that says, how can we incorporate art in our fullness of being into this work? Because we do not just fight for clean water just to have clean water sitting somewhere, right? We fight for clean water and access to these things so that we can live whole and complete and healthy lives. So what are these other things that we wish to pass on? We're whole and healthy. We want to pass on our culture. We want to pass on the things that we love. We want to share these things. So oftentimes when I'm in queer affirming spaces, that's one of the core pieces of being in those spaces. Like, how do we live in our culture and get this work done? Not how do we just get the work done, right? Like, so the biggest thing for me in queer spaces is just people get to be their whole selves, and you get to find joy in some of the nitty gritty work that's not always fun, right? Environmental justice is not always fun, nor is it always kind. Sometimes you have to put your bodies on the line, but knowing that you can be your whole self while your body's on the line with some whole people, like that feels really good. There's just solidarity in that.
Yeah, I love it. I could go next and do a little backwards thing. That's great. What I would add is I think just something I've learned in working in so many different organizing groups, formal and informal, is just like to just be okay with a steady pace. Like, I think oftentimes when we find groups where our like purpose and belonging is just like so clearly aligned, the expectations get really high, and then sometimes so can the conflict and tensions and drama. So I'm trying to be like, yes, there's like so many beautiful things we could do together, and the trust and intentional relationship building is so important. So leaving space for a relationship before jumping into all the tasks and finding that balance of like purpose and belonging. And then I just want to like lift up, like there's been some amazing projects just budding up. One of them, the People of the Global Majority in the Outdoors, Nature and Environment, I think that's what it's called, started in 2018. They've had like 2 or 3 different summits before COVID, and bringing together folks who work in a lot of different environmental intersections, who are Black, Indigenous, POC, doing some really cool work. There's Queers for Climate Justice is another group. There's some amazing folks who are leading disability justice, climate justice, queer justice work here in the Bay that love to just share more about. And then there's a network of queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, POC, farmers, food workers, earth workers, called Interlocking Roots. There's this like nerdy, like queer ecology group that does artsy things in Chicago. So I feel like folks are finding each other who do this work, creating different formations. And I think just figuring out like how we're building that mycelium, how we're continuing to have those networks and sanctuary places will be really important across the sectors we work in, and the groups and place-based work that we're accountable to. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'll pass it to you, Marissa.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of like recent collaboration, I haven't actually felt very connected to, like, both of my BIPOC and kind of queer identities with the type of coursework that I've been engaging in at the Nicholas School, especially. But I guess to kind of go back to maybe one collaboration I have participated in. So we actually created my city's first Pride Festival and we had such an amazing committee. And I think my mom is actually on this call right now. She was the treasurer. So it was a beautiful family loving event. It was awesome. And I think in order to, create community for ourselves, I think one critical thing we need to do is start by being visible. And that was kind of our festival's motto, creating community through visibility. But also to preface as well, I don't feel like it was just a festival, but it was also kind of like the beginning of a social movement. It was also a resource fair. It also raised questions about the role of police in our spaces. It introduced intersectionality to our homogeneously affluent and white community of Thousand Oaks, California. And also it had a sustainable lens where we tried to, make these micro changes of eliminating like plastic water bottle waste. And I guess what I think is really useful for us is to kind of use some of these platforms we're given, like Pride, to inject these like dialogues of, what do we want our footprint to be, or who's holding positions of power in queer organizations, or, are we robbing Peter to pay Paul? And I guess what I mean by that phrase is, can we envision, trying to benefit our, local or grassroots communities versus entities taking funds from entities that will don our rainbows for Pride Month, but then fund our oppression or, pollute our communities elsewhere. And I think it's really important that we imagine a compassion that defies self-interest, and that requires a lot of work. And it requires a suspension of our own protagonism and a rejection of like consumer activism as a comprehensive means of support, and reflecting the needs of the entire community as a whole, respecting all of our diversities that have always existed, and not just, reflecting those with the purchasing power. And so I think, to build like a strong network in the environmental field, we could definitely build with tools that we already have, like Pride festivals or queer organizations that we already know of, to start inserting those dialogues.
I want to chime in after that. Narissa, you made my brain like did this little creaky noise, and I was like, that's another thought. So I've been having this experience in doing work where people who are in a particular margin don't feel that they need to have equity training in that particular margin or in other margins, right? And I want to say, if you're building a queer network that's in the environmental field, equity training will be absolutely necessary, because if I'm thinking about a queer space that I, as a Black and brown person, want to show up to, I want to make sure that I'm affirmed in my full self and not just in my queer self. So I think just making sure that people have some equity training, like even if it's just around queerness for queer people, like I still think that's absolutely necessary, because every time you go through a training, every time you meet new people and you have these conversations, there's new language that you acquire in those processes, right? There's new ways that you learn to relate to others, and that will be absolutely necessary to show up in space well with other people. Because one of my mentors states that sometimes people don't vote like with their hands, like they vote with their feet, which means slowly they stop showing up. And so you want to make sure you're creating a space that's inclusive, but also practices actively making sure that people are included through these equity trainings. Like you can keep doing them. Like it's important, like have this new language so that people can stay and not just come and go because it's no longer a space where they can be whole.
Okay, I think I'll jump in with the next question. Thank you guys so much. This has just been so open and honest and lovely. Our next question for you is, what advice would you give to LGBTQIA+ identifying students who are looking to build supportive professional relationships in the environmental space?
I guess I'll go ahead and start. I guess we're kind of shifting who begins. And I guess I'm going to probably come from just a more of like a career or kind of vocational space, because I guess for now we got to work to live. But at least one thing I like to emphasize, I think informational interviews are really important. And I think you could sample like a lot of different jobs without having to actually try each one out, as we're obviously limited by time. And I think through like these kinds of interviews, you can get a feel for the vibe of the work or the workplace culture. And also, I think what was really telling to me is also like how your questions are actually answered during an informational interview is super important. And personally, I haven't actually had a really good experience with like the clean tech industry, as it's kind of totally dominated by like kind of like, you know, MBA white business bros. And so this is definitely a part of the energy sector I have chosen to stay clear away from, just for my own self-preservation. I've tended to have better experiences from people within, you know, certain government agencies and even utility companies, as these spaces tend to be a little bit more diverse and are kind of ahead of the energy industry in terms of at least internal workplace DEI dialogue. There's definitely so much work that needs to be done though. And kind of what Desi's talk about, like the flattening of our identities, that's still a thing that's happening, even though these conversations are happening. And lastly, I'd also encourage, you know, folks to find, you know, LGBTQ plus or allied professional organizations in your industry. And if one doesn't exist, then you can maybe consider creating one.
Yeah. Should I? Okay, I'll keep the same order going. Let's see. What would I add to that? I feel like it's helpful to you know, depending on what you're going into, like researching groups that maybe you already have a crush on. They might not be hiring now, but it's just a great time to like interact with them, even if they're not, you know, go to their events, programs, actions, campaign work, because it is a little bit rare, like to sometimes could just feel rare to find that like perfect fit of like values are aligned. I like what they're putting out there. How do I get in with them a little bit more? You know, having your crush list is good. And then I appreciate what you said of like, if you don't see what you're looking for out there, can you start your own? And I know that it can feel very intimidating, especially with the nonprofit model. We have a nonprofit model culture, if you haven't noticed, in a lot of environmental and climate justice work. There's some really amazing diversifications of that happening in like regenerative economic stuff. New Economy Coalition is a great group to look at for some of the organizations doing work across energy and food, solar, land rematriation and reparations. That are building cooperative models of businesses and things like that. So I think it's just like getting in that research of there's a lot of like new budding things, and starting to reach out to folks. And I feel like as long as we're still on Zoom, it'll probably be a Zoom event, but eventually, hopefully that in-person connection piece will come back. It's a much different terrain. I'll stop there. If I think of anything else, I'll chime in after you, Elijah.
I want to ditto that crush list. I think that's a wonderful idea that I wish I'd thought of before I graduated college, to have a crush list. And that also makes me think, don't rush into an employment. You know, of course, everyone has bills to pay. So when you're graduating, you might be like, okay, I need to find something that's just going to cover my bills for now. I do think taking the time to date organizations, to date coalitions is important, because you get to learn a little bit more about their inner workings. Because I definitely went through the experience of thinking that I found my ideal organization and was really excited about joining, being a part of it. And, you know, because I didn't go through this dating process with the organization, once I was staff, you're inside, right? You're no longer on the outside. You're no longer this like little electron bouncing around these protons. No, you're in the center, and you get to see the inner workings and the inner dynamics of the organization. And sometimes that is the part of the process that is out of alignment when you're a queer person, or if you're a Black person. So I would say making sure to take the time to actually go to these events, like Desi said, and like learn who the people are. And I'd like to like cut out the like professional piece, just because I feel like with my work, I'm really just developing relationships. Like most of the people I meet, I'm friends with. Like we're going to the same place. Like we're visioning a world that we want to see together, and like we're walking together to get there. So it's not like it's just I'm building this relationship so that I can get a job, or I'm building this relationship so I can peek into this field. No, I'm building this relationship because I know we're trying to get to the same place where we're in right relationship with the planet and with one another. And so those are the people I want to travel with for a lifetime. So I think when you're thinking about building those professional relationships, think about building relationships with people you like, people you want to be around, people who are affirming of you, and people that you feel reciprocity with. I have seen a lot in this work that, especially when you're in the student role, you show up in this role that's of service. And I'm not saying that that's a bad role, but sometimes you get locked into that role, and you want to make sure that at least if you're graduating that role, or even while you're during that role, that there's some reciprocity that's happening there, right? That you're getting as you're giving. I believe that if we're really transforming relationships, we got to be transforming all of our relationships. So you should be like having this expectation as you're building relationship. There's going to be some reciprocity there, right? You're going to be pouring into each other as plants, like so that you can fuel each other and grow.
Hi, my name is Emily. I didn't introduce myself earlier, but I also work with the UEU. I'm a freshman at Duke right now, so I'm one of our project interns. And I love these analogies that everyone is giving, like the crush list and the electron and the protons. I think that's really fun. So we're going to do a round of individual questions. And so the first one is to Desi. You began your work and career as a student, as many of the attendees are, including myself. And years later have forged a path bringing together multiple parts of yourself fully into your work. How did you carve this path for yourself and stay true to your passion and vision? What were the challenges, and what would you say to inspire those listening to make their own way? And I'll type this in the chat as well.
Cool, thank you. Wow, these questions. You got me like on essay prompts over here. Appreciate it. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling the verbosity of all of it. So I feel like for me, I think meandering is okay. I feel like I've played a lot of different roles across my time. So I started student organizing. I led the like queer student assembly, and we did a lot of actions with the political student assembly against sweatshops and gender inclusive bathrooms on campus, and all sorts of other fun events where we just had a big party in the middle of the field, you know, like all of these things. But in that, I was learning a whole lot of things like managing budgets and various administrative things, event planning. Oh my gosh, everything you do will have some kind of event planning related to it, most likely, unless you get the ultimate introvert job where you're just doing research, but eventually you're gonna have to present that at an event. So it's just like that sort of like, you know, like the buckets of like, okay, there's like skill sets that kind of just happen along the way for me, and then the things that I knew I passionately wanted to do. Growing up, I didn't have a very close relationship with the outdoors. My mom came from a lot of land-based trauma in Louisiana. When we moved to California, we weren't like camping every weekend. My first like opening up to just being outside was at Joshua Tree. Shout out to SoCal people. And then from there, I did some woofing, which is when you go to an organic farm and you exchange your labor for time, which is a mixed bag. Nonetheless, had my first love affair with plants. And then from then on, you know, did a farming apprenticeship, worked at some farms, various food justice world stuff while I was still working at a queer study center in religion at Pacific School of Religion. My first gig was at a public policy institute, UCLA, the Williams Institute. They count all the gays. I don't know if y'all are familiar with them. Great folks. They do some wonderful stuff. I decided public policy isn't for me. And it was a lot of like law, like stressed out lawyers. And I was like, I don't think I want to go that way. So that meandering, you know, now I'm meandering in terms of my own linear timeline of career and choice and things. But I think for me, while I was working at the Queer Study Center at Pacific School of Religion, doing event planning, program managing, a little bit of everything, which is often what you get in any particular nonprofit or school institutional job. I decided to do a master's while I was there and was able to get a little bit more clear on the intertwining pieces of like, what am I passionate about? What most interests me? What are the skill sets that like really make me come alive? You know, y'all know that quote, like, do what makes you come alive because that's what the world needs. And finding that balance. And then when I met Movement Generation, I was looking for BIPOC folks doing ecological justice work that was politicized, that was both hands-on and practical, and also like big picture vision, that was visionary and oppositional. And then I found Movement Generation. Went to a 4-day retreat, was like, how do I be a part of it? It was my crush list for a while. And then one day I was doing part-time farming, part-time working at a land trust. Another part of my journey was like, I started organizing around housing justice. Gentrification is a huge reality, both here in this city and other places. I helped start the People of Color Sustainable Housing Network, an informal organization that then we did a little fiscal sponsorship with the land trust. Then I got to learn a bunch of technical skills about how to run a land trust and what it was. Really good point of advice. It's great to learn things and get paid for them at the same time if you can, in terms of new skill sets. And then with AMG, it just kind of came together as like a sweet spot of a lot of the work that I had.
Well, hello.
Who is there?
What's
Hello.
up?
Someone's on the phone. What's up? Sorry. Just that little Zoom moment all year. I love that one. Yeah, I think the challenges are just like, one, capitalism, right? Finding the spaciousness to do and figure out what you want to do and live into your roles and not just your work, right? Because like, I think one of our big shifts that we're trying to do, if we're trying to bring about a new ways of being in a new world, is that all of the roles that we play are valued, including care work, including those administrative things that nobody else wants to do. And the big challenge is like finding that, getting out of a place where those silos were like the cultural foundation, like finding places and people who are willing to hold the complexity. It's kind of the running theme for me. Like, if we're not willing to hold each other's complexity, the complexity of the work we're doing, the contradictions we're in, we're not going to get very much done. It might look good on paper. There might be one outspoken, charismatic person, but then everything internally is dysfunctional. Like, I think if I hadn't found pathways and moments that were like, just gave me the like light bulb that like, oh, this place isn't willing to accommodate enough complexity and difference for me, or maybe just doesn't have the capacity to, and I need to move on, right? Yeah, I feel like that's the through line for me in terms of challenges and then trying to come out of that. And I feel like that's the best part of the work I'm doing now, is that embracing of complexity. So I hope that helps. That was a little bit of a rant, but thank you for the question. I'll think about it more. Maybe I'll do some journaling.
This one's for Elijah. What role do you see health and wellness playing in the environmental justice movement? And how do you see the LGBTQIA+ community showing up in that movement?
So as everyone might know at this point, I'm a Kundalini yogi, right? So I practice yoga as my way of grounding into myself, into my wholeness, into just being. And I think there's this concept that you hear a lot when you're working professionally, where people say, kind of leave your baggage at the door, right? Don't bring those emotions, don't bring those experiences into the room, right? And so I think a part of health and wellness and how that works into the, is woven into the environmental movement is actually, we bring that into the room. Like, we don't just throw that away, because you don't actually get to throw that away, right? Like, if you're frustrated one day, like, you can say you said it at the door, but that's going to enter the meeting with you, right? It's gonna impact the conversations you're having. It's gonna impact the way that you're interacting with one another. And I think an important piece to note is that when you're doing environmental advocacy and environmental justice work, oftentimes that means you're putting your body on the line, you're having these meetings at these random off hours because that's when everyone can meet, or you're showing up to do a sit-in somewhere, or like your body could essentially be in harm's way. And so I think health and wellness plays an important part to making sure that you can show up well in those spaces. So if you take, and sometimes that means interweaving it into a meeting, right? You can say, oh, I see that folks are frustrated today. let's breathe. Let's just take some time to breathe, because sometimes as a Kundalini yogi, I've been learning that people aren't always breathing well, right? And they have this high anxious breath that sits at the top of their chest. And you're just like, I see why you're holding anxiety, because you're holding it in your body. And sometimes just the wellness piece is just adding that little layer in a meeting, taking a breather, voicing concerns, right? So they're in the air, like Desi said, with holding complexity, like holding the full complexity of the human experience in these meetings. And then using that as anchors to get the work done, right? Because sometimes some of that anger and frustration is because of the environmental hazards that you're experiencing. And so bringing that into the room actually really beautifully informs the conversation and the work that is happening. And it can also inform better ways to relate and engage with one another, right? So maybe a part of health and wellness says that, okay, sometimes when we have a meeting where everyone gets frustrated because we're moving through some complex stuff, right? Maybe we're talking about equity and we're talking about race and how that overlays with the environment. You have to incorporate in just pauses and silence, right? Or you have to incorporate in loving accountability, right? And I think that's a layer of wellness where you can say, okay, I'm going to take a breath. I need us to pause, and then I need to engage you on this thing that you said because it has caused me some harm, and I just want to see if we can reconcile this collectively together in this moment. And then just speaking to, hold on, what was the second part of the question? Let me look in the chat real quick. Oh, so I'm an old man, so I always have stories. So the story I'm sharing is my experience with the Queer Mobilization Fund, which is a fund that's a part of the Southern Vision Alliance. And we were essentially tasked with just kind of seeing how queer people are navigating the current environment and what resources they need in order to mobilize around like protecting queer and trans persons and people of color that fit in that category. And what I learned through this process of interviewing a lot of queer folks is that queer folks have this natural tendency to not fit in the norm. It's just this natural tendency, especially when it comes to professions. And so I see a lot that queer people are literally carving out their own work, right? So they're like partially employed and they're like doing this contract work on the side and they're farming in the evening time. And then they have this farm share thing that they're also doing. And so I think the way that queerness naturally shows up, if we're talking about health and wellness, is that naturally queer people gravitate towards these things to keep themselves well because society has harmed them so much. And oftentimes we don't fit in these spaces. So we naturally say, okay, I need to make sure I'm taking care of myself well, because otherwise, when I'm in this situation where I may not have access to all the resources I need to do this work that I feel like I'm called to do, but there's not necessarily this cookie cutter position that really fits my role, how do I make sure that I can stay grounded in that work? And so oftentimes I've seen in my work in North Carolina that there are a lot of queer people doing a lot of work around herbalism and a lot of work of how around reconnecting with land. Maybe that's farming, maybe that's just getting your hand in the soil, maybe that's laying out on the grass, and how that can also be therapeutic to the mind and body. So I feel like queer people have already naturally taken this leadership role in the process of health and wellness as it relates to the environment and taking care of one another. And oftentimes in spaces, I feel that we may not necessarily be tasked with, but often step up to the plate in our process of querying up processes, right? We invite people to take better care of themselves, right? We say that this thing has harmed me, so like maybe it has also harmed you. Maybe take some space for yourself to think about that and think about how this lays into why you might be upset today. I think queer people are always inviting people in. So I'll just pin it there before I ramble forever, I promise.
Thank you, Elijah. I think what you were saying about queer people carving their own paths is extremely powerful. So I just wanted to thank you for that. The next question is for Narissa. Oh, also Narissa, me and Emily are also from Thousand Oaks. So I just want to say that. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
It's such a small town you just passed through. That's so crazy.
Yeah, small world. It was pretty cool to hear that. But yeah, our question for you is, what would a just energy transition look like to you? How do you see the queer community showing up in that vision?
Yeah, sure. So this might be a very unpopular opinion kind of held within the renewable energy industry. But it's funny, I sometimes don't I think renewable energy isn't always the solution for a just transition, because I think renewable energy is still kind of posited on the same kind of extraction philosophy and exploitation of, people and, animals and the planet. So I think sometimes energy doesn't need to be a part of the equation at all. And then also, I think even other things like, having like, alternative modes of like, architecture where energy doesn't have to even be brought into the equation, where we don't have to necessarily use air conditioning. Like, I think other like, historical societies have managed to, design, buildings that don't require, a current. But I guess like if we're going to go ahead and, bring it back to, energy though, specifically, I think one aspect, I guess, of a just energy transition is, I think, envisioning a world where we can see energy access as a human right, along with housing, healthcare, or education, or food or water. And I think energy is kind of critical, because there is like a correlation, I think, with energy use. As energy use has increased, I think, overall health outcomes have improved, and both birth and death rates have decreased. So it may not necessarily be a stretch to say that energy has allowed us to actually live longer lives. And energy access is critical to being able to participate in modern society, especially given the remote structure of the pandemic. I mean, because of electrons, we're sitting right here, right? We're able to stay here right now, having these discussions. And when I mentioned like, energy as access as like a human right, and I find responses or arguments of, oh, is that feasible? Or like the same kind of response to things like healthcare for all, like, is that feasible? Can we do it? Can we afford it? I actually find some of those, I mean, I can see that some of those questions, may be understandable based on kind of, how we've been indoctrinated, but also when those are framed as arguments, I actually find them pretty unconvincing. To me, it's more like, is there the political will to do it? Because we have the resources, they're not justly distributed. And secondly, I think to also have a just energy transition also involves connections to social, procedural, and distributive justice, all of which are things that are really lacking in the energy industry. And lastly, I think it's also really critical to not treat energy or electricity as just a neutral stream of electrons. There was like an article that was assigned in one of my classes that brought a lot of really good points, and I'm going to bring those into here. So I think it's really important that we need to move away from concepts that understand energy as a thing or as a resource, and move towards the idea of it as a social relation that's really mixed up in both power and socio-ecological change. And I think this web of social relations in which electricity and electric utilities are combined informs the ways, like, let's say electric utilities expand, develop, and price, electricity, basically what we end up paying as ratepayers. And basically like the stream of electrons that's flowing through like distribution wires and the prices charged for it and the value that they provide represent a lot of different things, like past labor processes, past capital accumulation strategies, and most importantly, past power struggles. So I think it's really critical that we question the historical and geographical developments that lead us to things like energy poverty or steeper electricity rates for certain communities or pipelines, that these are not just neutral engineering projects, and how certain people have been able to accumulate to the exclusion of others, whether that's to the exclusion of BIPOC people or queer people, or what entities actually get to define, or demographics that actually get to define the rates that we pay. This is where the rubber hits the road of capitalism and racism, as the two are inextricably linked. And I see both like the queer and BIPOC community showing up as long as we keep questioning not just the construction of the energy industry, but how power is constructed and shared in the United States. And kind of also on a side note as well, I think one thing we could also do to even ensure a just energy transition is also, being at the Nicholas School right now, studying, energy and environment as my specialization, I think we need to completely revamp how we engage in STEM education specifically. I think STEM as a field can be horribly toxic and not conducive to one's mental health. And part of that, part of the reason why I personally haven't been able to be as involved in, spaces that I've been involved in prior to grad school is because of just how pedagogy in STEM is structured. It's very standardized, such an emphasis on, standardized testing, which has really problematic roots. Also, sometimes like a lack of critical inquiry, you're just kind of a calculator, just churning out numbers, or again, treating some of these like engineering projects as neutral and not as a reflection of, again, like how power and wealth have been accumulated by certain entities or groups of people. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Wow, so much brilliance and depth in this room. I'm so grateful to each of you. We have a little bit of time. If folks have a few questions that you want to ask, feel free to either put those in the chat. You can send them to me, or you can raise your hand. I will say I've already gotten a question for the panelists in the chat that was sent by direct message. And so someone asked, and I'm going to pull it up because I copied it. As a parent of a daughter that identifies as a lesbian, what can I do to support her to empower herself to speak up in different spaces as a young, Black, gifted, and queer person? Such a beautiful question.
I saw you going for it. You go for it, Elijah. I'll go after you.
You did see me. Okay, thank you. So I don't know if people have watched Pose, but there was this beautiful moment where what was her name? Candy. After she had passed, was talking to her mom, and her mom said, "There was no guidebook on how to raise you," And there's this very deep, tearful moment, and I think that's the reality. Like there is no guidebook for how to raise and how to love, and my biggest thing, if I go back to my own personal childhood, is that I, along the way, just wanted to be loved and affirmed and poured into, both by my parents and the people my parents brought around me, right? Knowing that it was safe to be, exist, expand as I was growing. So I think the biggest thing I would highlight is love in a way that transcends just your relationship with your daughter and expands from there into your relationships with other people, so that she can also see in these other places affirmation.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I'm imagining like my mom asking this question. Yeah, and like you said, like there's not one answer, but I think just that, like, as of someone who was very introverted and quiet for a lot of my youth, I actually appreciated my mom just being my only audience sometimes, like sometimes you just need to tell one person what you're thinking before you could feel comfortable telling a whole room of people how you're thinking or how you're experiencing the world. And that the practice of being able to tell your truth, and having a trusting relationship to do that is so important. And a lot of folks don't have that with their family. For a long time, I didn't have that with my mom because I didn't think I could. But knowing that I could, once I started to know that, she became that person for me that helped me build the confidence to just understand myself in a different way. So yeah, thank you for asking my question.
I don't think I have anything additional to add. Y'all just took the words out of my mouth on that one.
Thank you all. What other questions do folks have?
May I pose a question as a panelist?
Absolutely.
I was on a call, and one of our check-in questions was today, specifically for today, what are the things that are causing you to show up for this work? Like, what is giving you the life and energy to show up today?
I think one thing that kind of, I think one thing that kind of gives me a little bit of light to show up is, this idea that another world is possible. And that idea, was something I ended up bringing back with me from some time I actually spent with the indigenous Zapatistas in Mexico. And yeah, it was definitely quite the experience. But yeah, it was just fascinating just to kind of see a completely different mode and way of being that's so different than what we have been accustomed to in the United States. And just seeing kind of a society like a net zero trash society, not insane amounts of like energy consumption, this and that, and even just like kind of how their society is structured, where governance is horizontal versus vertical top down, and how positions of community involvement are rotated, so there's not any particular concentration of power behind one individual or a cult of personality. But I think the biggest takeaway from all that is being able to see that, like, not only is another world possible, but also a world where differences are respected. And I've seen that in a lot of the amazing spaces I've had the opportunity to take a part in. Not this idea, for example, like let's say women, in the workforce who feel like that they have to assimilate to masculinity to be seen as valid. And I think it's really important to emphasize that assimilation is not liberation, it's conformity. And so, seeing, having been in part of spaces, where, differences are respected, and also, having a space to just continue to dream, idealize, and envision that another world can happen, and, not forgetting that.
Appreciate the question and your answer too. I think today, the first thing that came to mind are my seedling trays that I'm watering right now. Water before the call, so I wouldn't worry. But I feel like every year, every season, just like remembering that like every seed is just like an act of faith. I got some sunflowers coming up, some hot peppers, some sweet peppers, and just knowing that like those heirloom ancestral seeds and tastes are just like part of a bigger fabric. This gives me hope, and it's that practice. That's a practice of being in relationship, and it helps me like lead with vision, like what you were saying. Like I think it's so easy to get into this work and just learn to love the fight and not have any more space for your vision. And we can't do that, or we'll just burn out, right? The vision has to be so irresistible and so felt, right? I think that's why I miss being in person with people in retreats and spaces like this, because it feels like we have this pause moment to just actually practice how we actually would want to be for a week or a few days or whatnot. But making more of that space just on the everyday and in the work we do. Like one of the things that we talk about in G is like in traditional campaign organizing, we, identify a problem, we figure out who the authority people are, and we go bang at the door and demand that they fix that problem. And then even when they say that they're going to do it, either governments or corporations, we spend years trying to keep them accountable to actually do that thing. When what we actually want to do, and what a lot of our, movement folks have been doing for years, is the model where we identify our needs and the problem, we meet that need ourselves, and we can test for the power to govern that space. And that is like taking the land, making it better and protecting it through custom. Like that's the kind of shit that just makes you like, okay, that's the world we need. We need to change the shit through custom and actually contest for the power to do it. And bringing those things together, because often it's easy to just like, for some people, it's like, I'm just gonna go like have my own little thing. But if we're not contesting for power in some way, then what are we doing, right? Anyway, all of that, just thinking about the land and the seeds just made me feel that way. Thank you for the question. What about you, Elijah?
I was wondering if I should answer or just not. I don't think it's great to be oppressed, right? Or to exist in the margins. I do, however, think that there's this specific type of love that evolves and emerges from being in the margins. Like this, it's this love that includes sacrifice. It includes kindness and grace because you've had to endure. It includes strength because you've been resilient to make it to this moment. And the relationships that you build with those whom are in the margins like yourselves are so robust, they're so complex, they're so beautiful, they're so affirming, they're so fueling to who you are. And I've been able to develop and cultivate those types of relationships. Like going back to that previous question, instead of just trying to make a professional relationship, like you're building relationships. And I think those relationships are the things that bring me joy, that call me back to the work on those days where I'm like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want, not today. Right. And so those relationships remind me that I have people that I love, that I'm accountable to. I have a world that I'm trying to get to, and a world that I'm trying to be in with the people that I'm accountable to. And I have a love for the world in which we exist now. So those are the kind of the elements that like bring me this joy to keep showing up, to keep coming back, even when it's a hard day, even if I fight with the people that I love, because that happens sometimes. But it's because of the vibrancy of the love that emerges from the margins that I just keep on coming back.
The vibrancy of the love that emerges from the margin. That's really beautiful, Elijah. We have one more question that came through the through direct message, and so I think this will probably be our closing question for the evening. So if you the question is, as a queer woman of color working in the environmental community organizing space, I often feel frustrated and that my perception of the value of my work is diminished when I remember that I am often working to alleviate the issues and problems caused overwhelmingly by white, straight, cis men. How do you keep yourselves motivated to do the work without feeling like you are cleaning up someone else's mess?
Oh man.
Reach. Reach.
Right? God.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first, Desi?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, that is the question of the night. I think, one thing I'm definitely learning about, throughout the short amount of years that I've, existed so far, I think one thing I like to really lean hard on is boundaries. Because yeah, I like this type of work, like, whether it's an energy industry, environmental justice, or just, any industry in general. I think the system is more than willing to milk you for all the juice that you have. And, especially like, becoming like the kind of person that does the uncompensated, diversity, equity, inclusion work. Or like, basically like, being kind of part of like a company's role, like to check a box. And so, and I think I was also kind of reflecting, in this conversation as well, how I've been personally taking a step back from, I guess some of the things that I've liked to do prior to grad school, like being involved in like, queer, BIPOC, EJ spaces. But, I think part of that too, and also not being very involved in like some of the EJ efforts within like, my program, is me setting boundaries, because, I don't want to necessarily become like the constant like DEI like spokesperson and just all that like, uncompensated emotional labor that, requires. And so, yeah, like the word that comes to mind for me instantly is boundaries.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Couple of things come to mind. I think first, on like a movement level, it's been encouraging to see folks like y'all need to do the work too, and be accountable to frontline communities most impacted by like all the fuckery of the last 500 plus years of how this system has been put together. And there's a lot of, amazing folks trying to shift and do the healing work, because we're all sick because of it, including folks at the top. Like nobody is like really healthy in this, in that deep spiritual way of like, I was listening to there's an organization called Black Land and Tower, and they have this Reparation Summer project that they did. Really beautiful project, amazing network of Black-led organizations doing land-based work redistributing money, redistributing resources, right? Like part of it is like y'all have been hoarding and enclosing land and labor, and that needs to be redistributed. And we need to build the infrastructure so that we can actually govern those resources. And Black Land and Power is one of the groups trying to do that work. And they were talking about a conversation with a potential funder, and like having people's right as they're about to write the check to redistribute some funds, their like grandfather comes and slaps that pen out of their hand. And it just occurred to me, I'm just like, no, that is some real shit. Like people have a lot of deep things to unpack. And then like radicalizing philanthropy, that whole part of the movement to move the resources of like, this wealth isn't yours. How do we redistribute it? There's some folks like committing to like give away over time half, if not all, of their accumulated wealth in this generation. So just to point to some of that stuff, the resource generation, Solidarity Network, a couple of good organizations to start with. And of course, not perfect. None of this is perfect. If we knew how to do it already, we'd already be free. It's messy. We're learning. There's healing. But I think for me, it's back on that like not spending all of the energy just fighting the bad. And I think of the last 4 years in particular, it's felt that way, that like all we could do is fight the bad because the bad is so bad that building the new becomes this smaller and smaller thing. But it has to be like woven into our life. Like if we don't have that energy coming from like the beautiful relationships to land in each other we want to have, if that's not what's driving us, like we're gonna burn out. And it happens again and again, right? So for me, it's finding that balance in the work that you do and the roles that you play. To have a work culture that's like, we needed to have time for rest, for care and healing, for connection, woven into our mission, into the things that we do, so that we could keep sustaining this. Because we can't just keep cleaning up the messes and putting up our shields where we need to. We actually need to have time to live into the new, into the world that we want for each other and for ourselves. So yeah, thank you for the question again.
I would like to toss it's kind of like bouncing off of boundaries in a way, which is choice. And so I have a friend who's going through a PhD process and is experiencing some very racist experiences in higher academia, no surprise there. And in our conversation, we were reminding ourselves that we can choose to and choose to not show up in spaces or show up in particular ways in spaces. So I would recommend, or the only thought that I really have around this is make sure, like when you're showing up in that way, that you're making that choice, right? Instead of feeling like you have to. I think at any moment you can decide, am I going to do this today? Or am I going to take care of myself and just not? Because I think, which is a layer of application of self-boundary, right? Like I don't have to always be called to be this person who steps in and do all this emotional labor, all this anti-racist labor in this space. Sometimes you can just say, I choose to let y'all know that this is a problem. I am not doing this work today because I've been doing it. Or you can just say for yourself, not today. They do not deserve the beauty that I'm bringing to this meeting today. And so I will hold it for another space. And I like to add in that piece that Desi said, just kind of reiterate that, work, also make sure when you're working, you have those spaces that affirm those things, right? So that you're also having that practical experience of living in a place where you don't have to always do that work. See if you could, if it's possible, right? I don't know exactly what role you're playing, but that you can cultivate that space where you can say, okay, can we do this work without me having to do this extra added baggage of work as well? Because I'm tired and I should not always feel called to do that. So I, again, close with, choice.
Wow. Well, that certainly was a powerful question. And thank you so much for your vulnerability and your insights and your sharing. Thank you to the Knit Queer Network. Thank you to the Undergraduate Environmental Union. Thank you to the Ludwig family. Thank you to student leadership at Duke. And can everyone here please come off your camera and clap or put some reacts up on the screen and let's just give our panelists some love. Thank you so much for your brilliance, for your work, for the difference you're making in the world, and for your sharing. I see that you're getting a bunch of love in the chat. So thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and find rest and find care. It's hard work.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks for inviting us. It was so great to talk with y'all, Elijah and Marissa. I'd love to talk with you sometime, like not on camera, and just like hang out. I think you're both amazing and brilliant. Maybe I'll come visit the Carolinas one day.
I'll be in California. I'll be in California this summer, so let's link.
Cool. All right, sounds good.
Yeah, it's also been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Have a great rest of your evening and
have a good night, everybody.
Take care.
Good night.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
This okay. Oh wait, is it still? Never mind.
You're good. Okay, let me